In a small, quiet town called Maplewood, life moved at its own pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and everyone knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where nothing much seemed to happen, until it did. There lived a woman who blended into the background of this sleepy town. She worked as a librarian, spending her days surrounded by books, helping people find stories that would take them to faraway lands. To most folks, she appeared ordinary, a simple woman leading an uneventful life. But what no one realized was that beneath her calm exterior lay a mind sharper than anyone could imagine. This woman had always been fascinated by the law. From a young age, she loved reading about famous court cases, legal principles, and how justice worked or sometimes didn't work in real life. Over the years, she had secretly devoured countless law books, studying everything from courtroom procedures to landmark judgments. Her nights were often spent highlighting important sections in thick textbooks or jotting down notes on complex legal theories. Yet, she never told anyone about her passion. Not her friends, not even her closest confidant. To the world, she was just the friendly librarian who helped you locate your favorite novel. One day, however, her peaceful existence was shattered. A powerful man named Judge Langley entered her life, not directly, but through a series of events that would change everything. Judge Langley wasn't known for being fair or honest. In fact, he had built quite a reputation for bending rules to suit his needs. People whispered about him behind closed doors, saying he used his position to help wealthy businessmen get what they wanted, no matter the cost. It all started when a rich developer approached Judge Langley with a plan. This developer wanted to buy a large piece of land in Maplewood to build a fancy shopping mall. The problem? That land belonged to the woman's late grandmother, who had left it to her in her will. The property held sentimental value. It was where she grew up, playing under the shade of ancient trees and listening to her grandmother's stories. Selling it was out of the question. But Judge Langley saw an opportunity. He figured the woman wouldn't put up much of a fight. After all, she wasn't some big-shot lawyer. She was just a librarian, right? So, he cooked up a scheme. With the help of forged documents, he claimed that the woman owed back taxes on the property. If she couldn't pay, the land would be seized and handed over to the developer. It was a dirty trick, but one he thought would work without any trouble. When the woman received the official notice, her heart sank. At first, she felt overwhelmed. How could this be happening? She knew she hadn't missed any payments, and her grandmother had kept meticulous records. Something wasn't adding up. As she sat alone in her cozy little home, staring at the papers, something inside her stirred. All those years of studying law suddenly felt like they weren't just a hobby anymore. They were preparation for this exact moment. Instead of panicking, she decided to act. She reminded herself of the countless hours she'd spent learning about rights, laws, and how to challenge injustice. Slow putting together a strategy, she began gathering evidence. She went through every document related to the property, comparing dates, signatures, and numbers. And then she found it, the first crack in Judge Langley's plan. The tax records didn't match. There were discrepancies that no one seemed to have noticed before. Someone had tampered with them. Realizing this was her chance to fight back, she dug deeper. Every evening after work, she pored over legal texts, searching for ways to expose the truth. She also reached out to a trusted friend, someone who had always believed in her strength, even if they didn't know about her secret obsession with law. Her friend listened intently as she explained what was happening. "You're going to take on a judge?" they asked, incredulous. "I don't have a choice," she replied firmly. "This isn't just about me. It's about standing up for what's right." With renewed determination, she prepared for the battle ahead. Little did Judge Langley know, the simple woman he thought he could push around was actually a legal genius waiting to strike. What he intended to be an easy victory was about to turn into the biggest mistake of his career. The woman's journey into the legal battlefield began with a mix of nerves and determination. She knew she was stepping into unfamiliar territory, but she also understood that backing down wasn't an option. Every evening after work, she transformed her small living room into a makeshift courtroom. Legal books were stacked on the coffee table, sticky notes covered the walls, and her laptop glowed late into the night as she typed out arguments and strategies. Her friend, who had promised to support her through this mess, often stopped by to check on her progress. One evening, while sipping tea at the kitchen counter, the friend asked, "Are you sure about this? I mean, you're going up against someone who's been in the system for years." She nodded, her eyes steady. "I don't have a choice. If I let them take what's mine without a fight, they'll do it again to someone else. And besides," she added with a faint smile, "I've learned a thing or two over the years." What she didn't say, but what her friend could sense, was that this wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could face her fears head-on. All those nights spent reading law books weren't wasted. They were preparing her for this very moment. The first real test came during the pre-trial hearing. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, with wooden benches that creaked under the weight of people sitting on them. The judge, Langley, sat high, above everyone else, his expression unreadable. He glanced briefly at the woman standing before him, expecting her to crumble under pressure. After all, she wasn't some big-shot attorney with years of experience. She was just a librarian. But when the proceedings began, something unexpected happened. Instead of stumbling or fumbling over words, the woman spoke clearly and confidently. She filed a motion to dismiss the case based on procedural errors, technical mistakes in how the lawsuit had been brought forward. The room fell silent as she cited specific laws and precedents, pointing out flaws in the process that even seasoned lawyers might have missed. Langley froze for a split second. His plan had seemed foolproof, but here was this woman, dismantling it piece by piece. He quickly regained composure, denying her motion with a wave of his hand. But the damage was done. For the first time, he realized he had underestimated her. Outside the courtroom, reporters lingered, eager to catch a glimpse of drama. Word had spread about the unusual case. A lone individual taking on a powerful figure like Judge Langley. When the woman stepped out, cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust toward her face. She kept her answers brief and polite, refusing to give away too much. Inside, however, her mind raced. She knew she'd struck a nerve, but this was only the beginning. Back home, she dove deeper into the details of the case. Something about the forged tax record still bothered her. They felt sloppy, almost deliberately so. Why would someone go through the trouble of creating fake documents only to leave obvious clues behind? She decided to dig further, poring over old property records and cross-referencing them with bank statements. Slowly, a pattern emerged. She discovered that similar lawsuits had occurred in the past, cases where individuals suddenly found themselves accused of owing money they didn't owe. In each instance, the outcome favored the accuser, often leading to settlements made under duress. What connected these cases? A single name kept popping up: Judge Langley. Her heart pounded as she pieced things together. This wasn't just about her land. It was part of a larger scheme. Someone, likely working closely with Langley, had tampered with official documents to manipulate outcomes. The more she uncovered, the angrier she became, not just for herself but for all the others who had been cheated out of their rights. Determined to gather concrete proof, she enlisted her friend's help once again. Together, they scoured public databases, filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and even reached out to former victims of similar scams. One elderly man, whose family farm had been seized years ago, tearfully recounted how he'd been pressured into signing away his property. Another woman described receiving threatening calls after questioning the legitimacy of her tax bill. Each story added another layer to the web of corruption surrounding Judge Langley. As the trial approached, the woman prepared meticulously. She rehearsed opening statements, practiced cross-examinations, and anticipated every possible argument the opposing side might throw at her. She knew Langley would try to intimidate her, to make her look inexperienced and unqualified. But she also knew something he didn't. Knowledge is power, and she had plenty of it. On the morning of the trial, she dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that projected confidence without being flashy. As she walked into the courtroom, she felt a strange mix of calm and adrenaline. She reminded herself why she was there, not just to protect her land, but to expose the truth. When the session began, Langley wasted no time trying to assert control. He interrupted her repeatedly, attempting to rattle her composure. But instead of getting flustered, she used his interruptions to her advantage. Each time he cut her off, she calmly cited rules of conduct, forcing him to back down or risk appearing biased. The gallery watched in awe as she dismantled his attempts to discredit her. By the end of the day, it was clear that the tide was turning. The woman had not only survived the first round, but had landed several crucial blows. Langley's frustration was palpable, his smug demeanor replaced by thinly veiled irritation. He hadn't expected this level of resistance, and it showed. That night, as she reviewed notes and planned her next moves, she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. She wasn't just holding her ground, she was gaining momentum. But she also knew the hardest battles lay ahead. Exposing corruption wouldn't be easy, especially when the person involved held so much power. Still, she refused to back down. Every step forward brought her closer to justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the system. The courtroom became a battleground, and with each passing day, the tension grew thicker. The woman stood firm, her quiet confidence surprising everyone who had underestimated her. Judge Langley, on the other hand, was visibly unsettled. He couldn't understand how someone without formal legal training could challenge him so effectively. Every time he tried to throw her off balance, she countered with precision, leaving him scrambling for control. It wasn't just her knowledge of the law that caught people's attention. It was her ability to think on her feet. During one session, the opposing lawyer called a witness to testify about the supposed tax discrepancies. This man, dressed in a sharp suit, seemed polished and confident as he took the stand. But the woman noticed something others missed. His answers were rehearsed, almost robotic. When it was her turn to cross-examine him, she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Sir," she began, "you mentioned earlier that you personally reviewed the tax records in question. Is that correct?" "Yes," the witness replied, nodding confidently. "And can you tell me exactly which documents you examined? For instance, do you recall seeing any correspondence between the tax office and my client?" The witness hesitated, glancing at the lawyer seated beside him. I don't remember specifics." She smiled faintly, sensing an opening. "That's strange, because according to these emails," she held up printed copies of internal communications, "there was no mention of any outstanding taxes tied to my client's property. In fact, these emails suggest the issue was flagged only after certain parties expressed interest in acquiring the land." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The witness shifted uncomfortably in his seat, stammering through vague responses. By the time she finished questioning him, his credibility was in tatters. Even some members of the jury exchanged skeptical glances, clearly unimpressed by his performance. Judge Langley watched all of this unfold with growing frustration. He tried to intervene multiple times, claiming she was overstepping boundaries or wasting the court's time. But every objection he raised was met with a polite yet pointed rebuttal from the woman, who cited legal precedents and procedural rules with ease. It was becoming painfully clear to everyone that she was more than capable of holding her own. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread like wildfire. People who had initially dismissed her as an underdog now spoke of her in hushed tones of admiration. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, eager to capture sound bites and snapshots. One journalist even approached her friend, hoping for insights into her background. "Who is she?" the reporter asked. "Where did she learn to argue like that?" Her friend shrugged, playing it cool. "Honestly, I'm as surprised as you are. She's always been smart, but this is something else." Meanwhile, the woman continued her relentless pursuit of the truth. Late at night, when the town slept, she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by papers and files. Her mind raced as she connected dots and uncovered new pieces of evidence. She knew exposing Judge Langley's corruption wouldn't be easy. Powerful people didn't fall without a fight. Still, she refused to give up. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing old property records, she stumbled upon a trail of suspicious transactions linked to the developer involved in the case. These transactions included payments made to shell companies whose addresses matched those of businesses owned by associates of Judge Langley. At first glance, the connection seemed coincidental, but the more she dug, the clearer the picture became. Someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks, but not thoroughly enough. Armed with this information, she decided to take a bold step. She filed a motion requesting access to additional financial records related to the lawsuit. Judge Langley predictably opposed the motion, arguing it was irrelevant and would delay proceedings. But the presiding judge, who happened to be filling, temporarily due to scheduling conflicts, saw merit in her request. Against Langley's protests, the motion was granted. When the documents arrived, they confirmed her suspicions. Emails and bank statements revealed a web of corruption involving forged documents, bribes, and backdoor deals. Most damning of all were messages exchanged between Judge Langley and the developer, discussing how to handle her case. The language was coded, but the intent was unmistakable. The discovery left her both furious and heartbroken. How could someone entrusted with upholding justice betray it so blatantly? Yet amidst the anger, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about exposing a system that allowed such abuse of power. If she succeeded, it wouldn't just be a victory for her. It would send a message to anyone else being exploited by similar schemes. As the trial progressed, she carefully wove the newly uncovered evidence into her arguments. Each revelation chipped away at the opposition's credibility, forcing them onto the defensive. During one particularly heated exchange, Judge Langley snapped at her, accusing her of dragging out the process unnecessarily. Without missing a beat, she responded, "Your Honor, if there's anyone prolonging this case, it's those who refuse to acknowledge the truth." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Even some spectators nodded in agreement, silently, rooting for her. Though Langley tried to brush off the comment, it was evident he was losing ground, not just legally but morally. Behind closed doors, however, Langley wasn't giving up without a fight. Frustrated and desperate, he began making veiled threats. After one session, he cornered her briefly outside the courtroom, his tone low and menacing. "You're playing a dangerous game," he warned. "People like you shouldn't meddle in matters above your pay grade." But instead of intimidating her, his words only strengthened her resolve. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "Justice isn't about pay grades, Your Honor. It's about doing what's right." Langley stormed off, seething. He realized too late that he had misjudged her entirely. Far from being intimidated, she thrived under pressure, using every obstacle as fuel to push harder. By the time the trial neared its climax, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Spectators packed the benches, hanging on every word. Lawyers whispered among themselves, marveling at the woman's tenacity. Even the bailiff, usually stoic, couldn't hide his curiosity as he glanced toward her side of the room. And yet, despite the mounting evidence and public support, the woman remained focused. She reminded herself daily why she had started this fight, not for fame or revenge, but because she believed in fairness. For every person who had ever felt powerless against injustice, she was determined to set an example. As she prepared for the final stretch, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Looking back, she saw how far she'd come. From a quiet librarian living an ordinary life to someone standing toe-to-toe with corruption itself. No matter what happened next, she knew she had already won in one sense. She had proven to herself that courage and conviction could overcome even the greatest odds. With renewed energy, she turned her attention to the closing arguments. This was her chance to tie everything together, to show the world the truth behind Judge Langley's scheme, and ensure that justice prevailed. Whatever the outcome, she was ready. The final days of the trial arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Everyone could feel it. The case was reaching its climax. The woman stood at the center of it all, calm but resolute, her eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and determination. She had spent countless nights preparing for this moment. rehearsing every argument and anticipating every counterattack. Now, as she prepared to deliver her closing statement, she knew this was her chance to make everything count. Before stepping into the courtroom that morning, she took a deep breath outside the heavy wooden doors. Her friend, who had been by her side throughout the ordeal, gave her an encouraging nod. "You've got this," they said softly. "Just speak from your heart." Inside, the room was packed. Reporters jostled for seats, their cameras clicking away. Spectators whispered among themselves, speculating about how it would all end. Even the opposing lawyers seemed tense, their usual confidence replaced by unease. Judge Langley sat stiffly, on his bench, his face unreadable but tinged with frustration. He had tried everything: intimidation, objections, even outright hostility, but nothing had worked. Now he watched silently as the woman approached the podium. She began her closing argument with a simple yet powerful statement. "This case isn't just about me. It's about truth, fairness, and holding those in power accountable when they abuse it." Her voice carried across the room, steady and clear. Every eye turned toward her, drawn in by the conviction in her tone. As she spoke, she painted a vivid picture of what had happened. Step by step, she walked the jury through the evidence she had uncovered: the forged documents, the suspicious transactions, the emails linking Judge Langley to the developer. She didn't rely solely on facts. She wove them into a narrative that resonated emotionally. Imagine working your entire life for something meaningful, a piece of land passed down through generations, filled with memories of family and love. Imagine then being told you must give it up because someone decided to twist the rules to suit their greed. That's what this is about. This isn't justice. This is manipulation. Her words struck a chord. Some jurors nodded subtly while others scribbled notes furiously. Even the judge, who had done his best to remain stoic, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The woman wasn't just presenting a legal argument, she was appealing to humanity itself. When it came time to address Judge Langley directly, she chose her words carefully. "Your Honor," she said, turning slightly toward him, "you have a duty to uphold the law impartially. Yet here we are facing overwhelming evidence of misconduct, not just from one party but involving someone entrusted with ensuring fairness." She paused, letting the weight of her accusations sink in before continuing. "I believe in second chances. I believe in redemption. But I also believe that no one, regardless of their position, should be above accountability." The courtroom fell silent. For a moment, there was no sound except the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then slowly murmurs broke out among the spectators. People exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward, eager not to miss a single detail. Judge Langley tried to intervene, attempting to declare a mistrial. "This is highly irregular," he snapped, his voice sharp with irritation. "Such accusations are baseless and inflammatory," but the woman was ready for him. With practiced calm, she cited procedural rules and precedents, pointing out that courts were designed to handle such revelations transparently. "If Your Honor feels unable to proceed objectively," she added pointedly, "then perhaps it's time to consider recusal." The suggestion sent shockwaves through the room. Recusal? From a sitting judge? It was almost unheard of, especially in cases like this. Yet, the logic behind her request was undeniable. Several jurors exchanged knowing looks, and even the substitute judge presiding over the session seemed to agree. After a brief recess, Judge Langley was formally removed from overseeing the case, citing potential bias. His expression darkened as he exited the courtroom, his authority stripped away in front of everyone. With Langley gone, the atmosphere shifted. A new judge took over, bringing a sense of neutrality that hadn't existed before. The prosecution, team now leaderless and disoriented, struggled to mount a coherent defense. Their witnesses faltered under cross-examination, their arguments crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. Meanwhile, the woman remained composed, guiding the proceedings with precision and grace. Outside the courtroom, news of Judge Langley's removal spread quickly. Headlines blared online and in print. Librarian takes down corrupt judge. Social media lit up with praise for her courage and intelligence. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her, calling her an inspiration. Yet despite the attention, she stayed grounded. To her, this wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about proving that ordinary people could stand up to injustice. Back home, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Sitting alone in her living room, surrounded by stacks of legal books and papers, she thought about how far she'd come. Just weeks ago, she had been an unassuming librarian, content to live quietly in the background. Now she was at the forefront of a landmark case, exposing corruption and fighting for what was right. It was surreal, but also deeply fulfilling. Still, she knew the battle wasn't over yet. While Judge Langley had been sidelined, the developer and his associates weren't giving up easily. They threw everything they had left into the trial, hoping to salvage their scheme. False testimonies, misleading interpretations of laws. It was ugly, but she expected nothing less. Each attempt only fueled her resolve further. She countered every move with meticulous preparation, never losing sight of her goal. By the final day of the trial, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. As the judge instructed the jury to begin deliberations, the woman felt a mix of emotions: hope, anxiety, and a quiet pride in how far she'd pushed herself. She knew the verdict wouldn't define her worth, but it would determine whether justice prevailed in this instance. That evening, she met her friend at a small cafe near the courthouse. Over cups of tea, they talked about everything that had happened. "Do you think they'll rule in your favor?" her friend asked cautiously. She shrugged, stirring sugar into her drink. "I don't know. But whatever happens, I did everything I could, and honestly, that's what matters most." Her friend smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're incredible, you know that?" For the first time in days, she laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh. Incredible, maybe, exhausted, definitely. As they parted ways, she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, feeling a strange sense of peace. No matter the outcome, she had already achieved something remarkable. She had shown the world and herself that standing up for what's right was always worth it, no matter the odds. Little did she know, the jury's decision would come sooner than expected. And when it did, it would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others who had ever doubted their ability to fight back against injustice. The morning of the verdict arrived, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. The woman woke up earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling as sunlight streamed through her curtains. Her heart raced, but she reminded herself to stay calm. This was it, the culmination of weeks of hard work, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. She had fought tooth and nail to expose the truth, and now the jury's decision would determine whether justice would prevail. After getting dressed in a simple yet polished outfit, she made herself a cup of tea. The warmth of the mug in her hands brought some comfort, grounding her amidst the chaos swirling inside her mind. She thought about everything that had led her here: the forged documents, the threats, the late-night research sessions. It all seemed surreal, like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Yet, despite her preparation, she couldn't shake the uncertainty gnawing at her. What if the system failed her again? What if power ultimately outweighed truth? Her friend arrived shortly after, offering a reassuring smile. "Ready?" they asked softly. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a faint grin, though her voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Together they walked toward the courthouse, where reporters and spectators had already gathered. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust into her face, and questions flew from every direction. "How does it feel to take on such a powerful opponent?" one journalist called out. "Do you think you've won?" another chimed in. She simply nodded politely, refusing to entertain speculation. Inside, she focused on staying composed. Today wasn't about headlines or public opinion. It was about the verdict. When she entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Every seat was filled, and the hum of whispered conversations filled the space. Jurors filed in quietly, their expressions unreadable. The new judge presiding over the case took his place, his demeanor calm but authoritative. As the clerk stood to announce the verdict, the room fell silent. The tension was so thick you could almost touch it. The jury find in favor of the defendant, the clerk declared firmly, not guilty. For a moment there was complete stillness. Then the gallery erupted into applause. Spectators clapped and cheered, many rising to their feet. Reporters scrambled to capture the reaction, while the opposing lawyers slumped in their chairs, defeated. Judge Langley, who had been watching from the sidelines, clenched his jaw, visibly furious but powerless to change the outcome. The woman sat frozen for a second, letting the words sink in. Not guilty. After everything she'd endured, after all the lies and manipulation, she had been vindicated. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just tears of relief, but of triumph. She turned to her friend, who gave her a tight hug, both of them, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. Outside the courtroom, the celebration continued. Strangers approached her, shaking her hand and thanking her for standing up against corruption. One elderly man, whose own property had been seized years ago under similar circumstances, embraced her tightly. "You've given us hope," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you." Reporters swarmed around her, eager for quotes. When asked how she managed to win against such powerful adversaries, she responded simply, "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just refused to back down when it mattered most. Justice shouldn't depend on wealth or influence. It should belong to everyone." Her words resonated deeply, echoing far beyond the courthouse walls. Social media lit up with praise, and local news outlets hailed her as a hero. People began sharing stories of their own battles with injustice, inspired by her courage. For many, she represented proof that even the smallest voices could make a difference when raised boldly enough. But the fight wasn't entirely over yet. With the trial concluded, attention turned to Judge Langley and the developer. Evidence of their misconduct, forged documents, bribes, and unethical dealings had piled up during the case. Law enforcement launched an investigation, seizing financial records and interviewing witnesses. Within days, charges were filed against both men, including fraud, abuse of power, and conspiracy. Judge Langley's fall from grace was swift and humiliating. Once a figure of authority and respect, he was now the subject of ridicule and scorn. His reputation lay in ruins, and he faced the possibility of prison time. The developer, too, found himself embroiled in legal troubles, his dreams of building a shopping mall evaporating along with his credibility. Amidst the whirlwind of events, the woman retreated to her quiet life. She returned to the library, shelving books and helping patrons as if nothing had changed. But things had changed, for her and for the community. People looked at her differently now, not just as a librarian, but as someone who had stood up to corruption and won. Offers poured in, speaking engagements, book deals, even job offers from prestigious law firms. While flattered, she declined most of them, unsure of what the future held. One evening, sitting alone in her cozy living room, she reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the countless hours spent studying law, the fear she'd felt walking into that courtroom, and the joy of hearing the jury's verdict. Most importantly, she thought about the people she had inspired, the ones who now believed they too could challenge injustice. Her friend visited later that night, carrying a bottle of wine. To victories big and small, they toasted, clinking glasses. To doing what's right, she added with a smile. As they talked, she realized something profound. This journey hadn't been about proving herself to others. It had been about proving herself to herself. She had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, and learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And while she didn't know what the future held, she felt ready for whatever came next. Little did she know, her story was only beginning. Across town, whispers spread among those who had suffered silently under systems of oppression. Inspired by her example, they began organizing, demanding accountability and transparency. Community groups formed, determined to ensure no one else would have to face the same struggles alone. In the months that followed, the woman received letters from strangers across the country. Some thanked her for giving them hope. Others sought advice on how to navigate their own battles. Each message reinforced her belief that change started with individuals willing to stand up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Though she cherished her quiet life, she couldn't ignore the growing call to action. Slowly, she began considering ways to use her experience to help others. Maybe she could mentor aspiring advocates or speak publicly about ethics and justice. Whatever path she chose, she knew it would involve empowering others to fight for fairness. As she closed her notebook one evening, penning notes for a potential speech, she allowed herself a small smile. Life might never return to the simplicity it once had, but that was okay. Sometimes stepping out of the shadows meant embracing a brighter, albeit busier, existence. And if her story could inspire even one person to stand up for what was right, then every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, and every battle fought had been worth it. Months had passed since the trial, and life in Maplewood had settled into a new rhythm. The woman returned to her role as a librarian, shelving books, recommending novels, and helping children find stories that sparked their imaginations. 2. The casual observer. It seemed like nothing had changed. She was still the same quiet, unassuming person who blended seamlessly into the fabric of the town. But those who knew her understood that something fundamental had shifted. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. And though she tried to keep a low profile, whispers of her courtroom victory lingered in every corner of the community. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the breeze outside the library windows, she sat at her desk sorting through a stack of letters. These weren't just any letters, they were messages from people all over the country. Some came from individuals who had faced similar injustices but felt powerless to fight back. Others were from students studying law, inspired by her story and eager for advice. A few even arrived from activists working to expose corruption in their own towns. Each letter was different, yet they shared a common thread: gratitude. Gratitude for showing them that one person could make a difference. Her friend stopped by during lunch carrying 2 cups of coffee. Still getting fan mail? They teased, setting the drinks down on her cluttered desk. She laughed softly, holding up a handwritten note. More than ever. I never expected this kind of attention. Her friend leaned back in the chair across from her, sipping thoughtfully. You've become a symbol, you know. People see you as proof that justice isn't just for the powerful. The comment gave her pause. Symbol? She didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like herself, the same person she'd always been. Yet, she couldn't deny the impact her actions had made. Strangers approached her regularly, sharing their struggles and seeking guidance. Local organizations invited her to speak at events about ethics, resilience, and standing up against wrongdoing. At first, she declined most invitations, unsure if she was ready to step into the spotlight. But as time went on, she began to realize that maybe she had a role to play after all, not as a hero but as someone who could inspire others to find their own strength. One evening, she attended a community meeting hosted by a group fighting to protect local green spaces from developers. As she listened to passionate speeches and heartfelt testimonies, she felt a familiar stirring within her. The same mix of anger and determination that had driven her during the trial. Afterward, several attendees approached her, asking for advice on how to navigate legal challenges and hold officials accountable. For the first time, she openly shared her experiences, offering practical tips while emphasizing the importance of perseverance. You don't need to be an expert to stand up for what's right, she told them. Sometimes all it takes is believing in yourself and refusing to give up. Her words resonated deeply, earning applause and nods of agreement. As she left the meeting, she realized that perhaps her journey wasn't meant to end with the trial. Maybe it was just the beginning of something bigger, a chance to empower others to fight for fairness in their own lives. Encouraged by the response, she started taking small steps toward expanding her involvement. She began mentoring young people, interested in law, hosting informal sessions at the library where they discussed landmark cases and debated ethical dilemmas. She wrote op-eds for local newspapers, calling attention to systemic issues and urging readers to demand transparency from their leaders. Slowly but surely, she found herself stepping out of the shadows, embracing a role she hadn't anticipated but couldn't ignore. One day, while browsing through old files at home, she stumbled upon a stack of notes from her late-night study sessions. Pages filled with scribbles, highlighted passages, and sticky tabs marked important sections of legal texts. Flipping through them brought back memories of long hours spent poring over complicated laws and precedents. It struck her then how much she missed the intellectual challenge, the thrill of unraveling complex problems and finding solutions. Her friend noticed the change in her demeanor when she mentioned the idea of pursuing formal legal training. "Do you think you're ready for that?" they asked cautiously. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I've spent so much time teaching myself, I might as well see where it leads." With renewed purpose, she began researching law schools and gathering application materials. It wasn't an easy decision. Going back to school would mean juggling work, studies, and personal commitments. But deep down, she knew it was the right path. This wasn't about chasing accolades or titles. It was about equipping herself with the tools to continue advocating for justice. As word spread about her plans, support poured in from unexpected places. Friends offered to help cover shifts at the library so she could focus on coursework. Former colleagues from the trial sent encouraging messages, reminding her of the impact she'd already made. Even strangers reached out, expressing admiration for her courage and determination. Their belief in her fueled her resolve, pushing her forward when doubts crept in. On her first day of classes, she walked into a lecture hall buzzing with energy. Students introduced themselves, sharing dreams of becoming corporate lawyers, prosecutors, and judges. When it was her turn, she simply smiled and said, "I'm here because I want to help people." Her classmates nodded respectfully, unaware of the battles she'd fought or the victories she'd won. To them, she was just another student, a blank slate waiting to be shaped by knowledge. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, her unique perspective began to shine through. During discussions, she drew connections between theoretical concepts and real-world scenarios, offering insights that surprised even seasoned professors. Her peers admired her ability to break down complicated ideas into relatable terms, often seeking her input during group projects. Though she remained humble, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not in her accomplishments, but in knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Back in Maplewood, her absence from the library was felt, but the community rallied around her. Volunteers stepped in to assist patrons, ensuring the library continued to thrive. Meanwhile, her story inspired others to take action. Neighbors organized petitions, demanding accountability from local officials. Schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility, using her example to teach students about standing up for what's right. Slowly but surely, a culture of advocacy began to take root, a legacy she hadn't planned but wholeheartedly embraced. Late one night, as she sat surrounded by textbooks and notebooks, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the quiet librarian, who once hid her passion for law, to the determined advocate inspiring change, her transformation was remarkable. But more importantly, she had discovered something profound. True strength lies not in titles or recognition, but in the willingness to act when it matters most. She closed her book, glancing at the clock. It was late, but she wasn't tired. Not mentally, anyway. Her mind buzzed with possibilities, each one brighter than the last. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face them. Not because she was fearless, but because she believed in the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. And as she drifted off to sleep, lulled by the rustling leaves outside her window, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Life might never return to the simplicity it once held, but that was okay. Sometimes, stepping out of the shadows meant embracing a brighter, albeit busier, existence. If her story could light the way for even one person to